I had heard the rumors. A cave deep in the mountains where people had died, and whispers about something unnatural. It was the kind of story you'd laugh off at a bar, but I wasn't laughing. I was in between jobs with plenty of time to kill, and these sorts of stories always drew me in like a moth to a flame. After a few drinks and persistent pestering, the drunk at the bar gave me an approximate location. The next morning, armed with curiosity and an unhealthy dose of arrogance, I drove up to the remote spot he described. The closer I got, the more my confidence wavered. Abandoned cars lined the roadside, rusted, gutted skeletons of vehicles left to rot. Their eerie stillness gnawed at me. Whose cars were these? Were they the victims? I should have turned back then. Eventually, I found it, a jagged tear in the mountainside, a black maw that seemed to exhale cold dread. As if to confirm my fears, scrawled next to the entrance were the chilling words, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." My stomach churned. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to leave, to get back in my car and drive as far away as possible. But something about the cave pulled at me, an unseen force that whispered promises of dark secrets. Against all sense, I entered. The entrance was tight enough that anyone without caving experience would have turned back immediately, but at 5'8" and 117 pounds, I'd always been well suited for this kind of thing. I squeezed and twisted through the narrow passageways for hours, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the damp, jagged walls. 3 hours in, I found a small cavern just large enough to stretch and breathe. I took a break and inspected my surroundings. That's when I saw the etchings, names scratched into the walls, alongside crude, disturbing drawings. One drawing in particular froze me. A crude map of the cave system. It depicted a figure crawling through a tunnel. Behind him, emerging from flames, were other figures. They were twisted, monstrous. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I should have turned back, but the same pull that lured me here kept me moving forward, despite the sweat pooling in my temples and the dread clawing at my gut. The next tunnel was even tighter, barely larger than a sheet of paper. I wriggled through it inch by inch, the rough stones scraping against my arms and legs. About 45 minutes in, I froze. A pair of souls stared back at me, shoes attached to a long dead body wedged in the narrow tunnel. Panic surged through me. I had to get out, fast. I began to shimmy backward, but then I heard it. Something was crawling toward me. The sound was faint at first, the soft scrape of nails or claws against stone. My breath hitched. "Hey!" I called out, trying to steady my voice. "Stop! There's a body blocking the way. I can't get through." The scraping sound quickened. Frantic, desperate, I had no choice. I pushed forward. The dead man's remains were brittle, his bones splintering as I clawed my way over him, the sharp edges cutting into my skin. Behind me, the crawling grew louder, closer. Then came the sound of cracking bones. Whatever was following me was eating its way through the corpse. Adrenaline surged and I scrambled forward, emerging into a massive cavern just as the tunnel behind me belched out a final chilling crunch. I wasted no time. I piled rocks, equipment, anything I could find against the crevice to block whatever was behind me. My heart was pounding, my chest heaving, but as I turned to inspect the cavern, a new horror awaited me. It was impossibly large, like the interior of a football stadium. The air was stiflingly hot, and the walls seemed to shimmer with heat. And then I heard them. Voices. Familiar voices. They whispered my name. taunting me, reminding me of things I'd buried long ago. My father's voice stood among them, a cruel sneer echoing in my ears. The things he'd done, the way he'd broken me as a child. It all came rushing back, raw and fresh. I tried to block it out, but then I saw it, the source of the heat, of the whispers. A pit of fire burned in the center of the cavern, its flames licking at the darkness above. From its depths, figures crawled, clawing their way upward. Their faces were twisted in agony, but some were disturbingly familiar. People I'd known, people I'd wronged. And then I saw him, my father, his face warped with hatred and rage, clawing his way toward me. "Boy," he roared, "where are you going? You're mine now. You'll stay with me forever." I ran. I found another crevice smaller than the last and threw myself into it. The walls scraped my skin raw as I crawled, desperate to escape the screams, the heat, the thing that had once been my father. The tunnel began to shake violently, rocks splintering and falling as if the mountain itself wanted to trap me. Behind me, the voice grew louder, angrier. "You can't escape me, boy." I clawed my way forward, ignoring the searing pain in my arms and legs until finally, I saw light. I pulled myself out of the tunnel, gasping, sobbing, and fell into the grass. My car was right there, parked 20 feet from the cave entrance. I didn't look back. I drove straight into town and never told anyone what I'd seen. I gave up caving after that. Whatever I found in that cave, it wasn't meant to be found, and I'll be damned if I ever go looking for something like it again. I'm currently in an immense amount of pain as I write this. My leg is stuck in a bear trap and the trap's teeth are digging into my shin. This is the most intense pain I have ever experienced in my life. I may never be able to use my left leg again, but that's currently the least of my concerns. I left my apartment around 10 p.m. I just moved in here and hadn't yet explored the woods. I'm the type of guy who really enjoys night walks, so I took my flashlight and pocket knife and headed out. Around 45 minutes into my walk, the trail that I was on theoretically ended. The reason I say theoretically is because there was a private property do not enter sign. Who in the world has private property 2 miles deep into the woods? I have to be completely honest when I say this. I make risky and stupid decisions sometimes. Growing up, my friends and I would sneak onto all kinds of private property, whether it was old factories, schools, malls, or things of that nature. Seeing as I thought this was just a piece of land deep in the woods, I honestly continued without any hesitation. I walked for what must have been about 15 more minutes when, all of a sudden, I reached a clearing. The grass was tall and thick, growing up to my waist. It had clearly not been cut in years. As I shone my flashlight around the clearing, I noticed that there was a small path that had been trodden through the grass. When I raised my flashlight to see where the path led, I illuminated a small cabin. The cabin was barely visible since I was about 75 yards away, and my flashlight is pretty weak. Why in the world would someone build a cabin all the way out here? At this point, I had 2 options. I could either walk toward the small cabin to see what was inside, or I would have to turn back. After walking for what was now about an hour, I decided there was no way in hell I would leave without checking out that cabin. I started walking toward the cabin through the path when, all of a sudden, my phone received an Amber Alert. The high-pitched screech startled me, and I stopped in my tracks. The alert rang out for about 3 seconds until I was finally able to silence it. Even though the sound had ceased, my heart was racing a mile a minute. At this point, I was about 15 yards away from the cabin and just standing still when, all of a sudden, a light turned on inside. My stomach filled with dread. Who the hell was living in a cabin in the middle of the woods? After freezing for a couple of seconds, I came to my senses and decided that I needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. I jogged through the tall grass, focused only on getting out of the clearing. I did not want to have an uncomfortable confrontation with whoever I had just woken up in that cabin. With all the adrenaline running through my body, I must have missed what was on the ground right in front of me. With one big stride, my left leg landed on a metal bear trap. The teeth of the trap clamped down on my leg. I immediately fell to the ground in pain, my left leg stuck in the trap. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened to me. I let out a cry, but immediately silenced myself. Who the hell puts bear traps around their house? I'm in an immense amount of pain, lying on the ground with tears in my eyes as I write this on my phone. The lights in the cabin have been turned off again, but I'm scared that I can't hold back the pain much longer. Should I ask the person in the cabin for help? But who the hell keeps bear traps around their cabin? As I looked around the ground near me, I noticed at least 5 other bear traps in close proximity. I must have been incredibly lucky while walking up to the cabin. If anyone has any advice, please help me. I'm in immense pain, and I don't know what to do. Isolation in the Atacama Desert was suffocating. My days were spent maintaining observatory telescopes, while my nights were consumed by aimless wandering beneath the vast, starry sky. One restless night, I strayed farther than usual, headphones muffling the silence. My phone's battery died, plunging me into complete stillness. That's when I saw them, faint, flickering lights in the distance, lanterns swaying in the wind. I followed them, my curiosity pulling me closer, until I stumbled upon a rusted metal door, half buried in the dirt. It was adorned with strange engravings of playing cards. I hesitated, then knocked. The door creaked open. A man stood there, smiling unnervingly. Without a word, he stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The bunker was dimly lit, and the walls were covered with shelves of scattered playing cards. "What brings you here?" he asked, his voice oddly cheerful. I work at the observatory," I muttered. I was bored. His smile twisted. "You shouldn't have come here." Before I could respond, his grin returned, stretching wider. "But since you're here, let's play poker." I sat at the table, uneasy. Behind him, something was covered by a cloth. The deck of cards felt warm in my hands, like they were alive. We played in silence. As hours passed, my unease deepened. Finally, the cloth slipped off, revealing a blank card. I froze. He noticed my gaze and smiled. "That card? It's the last piece of my collection, the King of Hearts. It's what I need to complete my deck." I laughed nervously. "What do you mean? It's just a card." "Of course, right now it's just a card. But soon it's gonna be a King of Hearts. The only card that I'm missing from my collection. All it needs is a soul who I could communicate to. And you're that lucky soul." He leaned in closer and spoke a word I couldn't understand. The air around me thickened, and the blank card in his hand began to shimmer. Before I knew it, I was trapped inside the card, unable to move, unable to scream. My body shrank, my form distorted until I was nothing but a King of Hearts imprisoned within the cold, flat surface of the playing card. "The souls trapped in these cards, they make me invincible," he said softly, as if savoring the thought. He waved a hand, and the walls of the bunker creaked open, revealing rows upon rows of skeletons. I was watching all this entirely trapped in a blank white surface. These are all 51 people. Oops, 52. You're the newest addition. Your flesh is still fresh. It shall rot soon, worry not, he said whilst laughing aloud. They all tried to leave, he whispered, but their souls became part of my deck, and now you all will play forever. Putting all 52 lively cards, including me, inside his pocket, he could be heard saying, "Now I'm always gonna hit a royal flush." As I lay trapped within the card, I could feel the faint echoes of other souls. Their whispers brushed against my mind, fragmented and desperate, pleading for release. The man shuffled the deck, his laughter resonating like thunder in my ears. "You see," he said, inspecting his grotesque collection, "each of you strengthens my power. The more cards, the more unstoppable I become." He slid the deck into his pocket. The darkness consumed me. Time no longer existed. All I knew was the cold, suffocating stillness. From within the cart, my torment was endless. The man would appear inside, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. He would mock me, walking freely in this prison where I remained bound. "How does it feel?" he would sneer, tapping the surface of my confinement. Sometimes he'd sit beside me, shuffling a deck that felt alive, each card whispering faint cries of despair. "I come here when I'm bored," he'd say, leaning closer. "The others scream, but you're my favorite." He would vanish as quickly as he arrived, leaving me alone, helpless, waiting for the next haunting visit.